You're listening to the Zoe Turner podcast, business and mindset conversations that will help you move from fear and uncertainty to development and growth so that you can crush both life and business. Please welcome your host, Zoe Turner.
Today's guest is the master of reinvention. He had a prominent jewellery empire that famously came crashing down overnight in the 90s, losing in today's money over £1 billion, all because of an ill-fated joke during his infamous speech at the Royal Albert Hall. Gerald has a new book out called Reinvent Yourself. It is a guide to show how you can reinvent your life, be successful, and achieve your potential to create lasting opportunity for business success. Welcome to the podcast today, Gerald.
Thank you, Zoe. Nice to see you.
I'm going to struggle with this name.
I've been called worse.
Have you? Oh, that's good. First of all, congratulations on the success of your book.
Thank you very much.
And what are you grateful for today?
Well, I'm grateful that I'm doing this podcast with you because it's nice to be doing something because, you know, I normally do about 50 or 60 speeches a year, which I love and enjoy, and I've missed them. So it's nice to be hearing my own voice again.
Well, thank you so much for that. I recall when I read your book, and a social interaction. This is your first book, not your second book. Social interaction was really important for you. One thing that you used to love back in the day was going into the shops and speaking to the managers and speaking to all the staff, doing all the, stuff on the ground. So I guess when everything came crashing down and you didn't have that, that must have been really tough for you. And in a way, quite similar to what you're experiencing now with not doing your speeches.
Well, this is really the worst of all worlds because, as you say, I used to love the camaraderie and the morale that we'd built up in the company. And I spent every Friday out on the road visiting the shops, chatting to the managers. And I love that. I'm a people's person. I love talking to people, learning from people. And I used to learn more actually from the managers than I did from the directors. I always feel it's better to go to the grassroots to really know what's going on in a company. So, when I lost my job, that was one of the things that I really missed, being on my own again, having to rely on myself for company. Rather than other people. So I became a bit insular. So I did a lot of cycling, which I love, but it's not the same as sort of mixing with people and networking. So then when I started doing the speeches, I really enjoyed that. Not only doing the actual speech, but spending the whole day chatting to everybody in the companies. That's now been taken away. So I'm going to really appreciate it when it starts all over again.
When you think back to that speech, your fateful speech that day at the Royal Albert Hall, what do you think now when you watch it back and you hear what you said?
Well, it was a bit of a dumb thing to say, ill-judged, but it shouldn't have had the reaction that it's had. And here we're talking about it 30 years later. It'll be 30 years in April. Not that I'll be celebrating that milestone, but I've never blamed the press or anybody else for my demise. I only blame myself. It was a mistake. But there's one, I don't know who said it, probably Richard Branson, that one thing is certain in business is that you will make mistakes. I just happened to make the biggest corporate mistake in history.
Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to your younger self, the younger Gerald, going into that speech on that day?
Well, probably wouldn't do the speech at all.
You'd listen to your wife.
Listen to my wife, yeah. I know. I mean, what's the upside of being high profile these days? You're only going to get, Donald Trump now. He has achieved quite a lot. He's a billionaire, and he became president of the United States. You can't really achieve much more than that. Yet all he ever gets is criticism and nasty comments about him. He's probably one of the most hated people around. So in this day and age, I can't see a lot of point. I don't want to sound cynical. I can't see a lot of point in being high profile. A lot of the businessmen that I know that are the most successful actually pay people to keep themselves out of the newspapers. So, yeah, if I wasn't as high profile as I was, I wouldn't have got the flack that I got. I probably wouldn't have got asked to do the speech in the first place. But I was, courting the press, doing a lot of features and stuff like that. And I was very well known. And we were benefiting to a certain degree because it wasn't only the Ratner shops. We had Ratners and H. Samuel and Ernest Jones. And because my name was Ratner, Ratners were doing very, very well because of it. But that wasn't really the reason why I did so much press. I probably like to see my picture in the paper. Is narcissistic, and you see people making that same mistake today. So the answer to your question is, it's all very well. I was a lot younger. It was 30 years ago. Was to show some restraint and to say no, and to not accept every invitation you get to appear in the press or at the Albert Hall.
What a lot of people don't actually know is that you owned most of the jewellery shops in the high street. It wasn't until I read your book that I knew this, like H. Samuel's. I get confused with Beaverbrooks and Ernest Jones. It was Beaverbrooks, yeah?
No, that was I tried to buy Beaverbrooks. Brilliant company, brilliantly run. And it's a lot more difficult to buy companies that are really well run. No, I had an unprecedented 50% of the jewellery market. There's very few people that have 50% of a market. And we had that with Ratner's, H. Samuel, Ernest Jones, Leslie Davis, Watch of Switzerland, Dales, and many, many more. And we had 1,000 shops in America. So people just think of it as the budget-priced high street chain of Ratner's, but that actually is not correct. It was a group.
I have to say, if I would think back to the 80s when I was a little urchin, as my friend's mum used to call me, in my ripped jeans, getting the bus or the train to like Middlesbrough High Street and Darlington, and walking past the Ratner's Jeweller's store and the H. Samuel's, that I would actually be sat here right now interviewing you.
Well, yeah, I probably, when I was running those shops, was not the same person as I am today. I was sort of rushing around like a lunatic, with this tunnel vision, expanding at the rate of knots. And of course, now I've got a lot of time to reflect on that and am much more balanced. And, as they say, you sin in haste and you repent in your leisure. So I spent quite a lot of time repenting what I did, even though it's not the greatest crime in history. It did have massive negative effects, as you're aware of, because we did have a fair business.
You say you're different. You're a different person now to what you were then. How different are you?
Well, I now much more measured, and my best friend Michael said to me that he said, "You're much nicer now," and I said to him, "Well, I'd rather be much richer and not so nice like I used to be." So yeah, you do become. Probably, when when you lose your job and they say you're going to spend more time with your family, that cliche, it's true. You do spend more time and you become better at being a father and a husband. It is a fact that if you're running a company and you're obsessed with growing it, that you can't juggle everything in one go, and certain things do suffer. And I think in those days, when I was running Ratner's, that was the only thing that mattered to me. I was obsessed with the success of it. And a lot of other things fell by the wayside. You know, I was listening to Arsene Wenger on Desert Island Discs, and he was saying that he refers to admit he's not a great father or husband because the Arsenal took over his life. And it does, and that is the danger. It does take over your life. So when I left, I started doing all the things that I tried to avoid all those years. But actually, I'm better off really to have a more balanced life and to not be just obsessed with one particular thing, one particular thing. You know, and now if I go to a dinner party or something, I'm sort of thinking about my business and myself. I'm very interested in what other people have to say. So I'm not in such a hurry to do everything. You know, I can wait for a lift. I'm more measured, I would say. But maybe that's just being older.
I guess so, yeah. You mentioned then about your friend, Michael Green.
That's right. I can see you've done your research.
So Tony Robbins very famously says that our friends are the way we are, what's the quote? How we are is the way we act. Do you know what? I've just forgotten that quote. But anyway, they say...
Is it something like, you know who your friends are or something like that?
No, it's not. I've got it written down somewhere. I've said this quote like 1,000,001 times before.
What's the gist of it?
But it's basically, he says that we are an expectation. The way we are, it's an expectation of our peer group. Because they say that we're an average of the 5 people that we hang around with. So back in the day, you hung around with friends who later came on to be very, very successful. How important do you think your peer group was to you in those days for you being a success? And, you know, was that a driver within your career?
It was the main driver. It was everything. I could see that Michael Green, at quite a young age, was achieving a hell of a lot. He floated his company. Shares went mad, and then he started doing deals, expanding the company. He was in the newspapers. Charles Saatchi, the same thing. And I was still, you know, working sort of with my father and making losses and quite well off. I wasn't struggling in any way, but I wasn't becoming a superstar like them. So I wanted to be like them. So, you know, that's one of the reasons that I got rid of my father, because I wanted to really drive the business. I wanted to be the boss. So, yeah, I mean, early on, they were enormous. When I say get rid of my father, I made him chairman and I was managing director before then. He was chairman and manager. So I didn't do him in or anything like that. Yeah, and he made a lot of money.
I knew what you meant then, but I guess some people who haven't read your book and don't know the whole story probably wouldn't have known what you were talking about.
No.
But he was, you know, you basically felt that a lot of you didn't feel that the business was progressing with him. And I think he'd got quite poorly. He'd had a fall or something, and he would say quite inappropriate things to people at work, and it was having a negative impact on the business at the time.
And you could let things roll on, because after all, we still had 130 shops. We weren't starving. We were going nowhere. We were sort of also rans as far as anyone was concerned. But you know, there's a lot of companies, family businesses that are like that. They're not ambitious. They don't care. As long as they make a reasonable living, they just let it carry on. So I could have allowed that to have just gone on and on. But because of Charles and Michael, to a certain extent, I felt that I didn't want that status quo anymore, that I was bored with what was going on. Also, the catalyst was H. Samuel, who, of course, we were to acquire later on, tried to acquire us. So there was a danger there that I'd lose my job altogether. So, yeah, I suddenly, at the age of 34, made the move, told my father that he has to give way, which I didn't really have the support of the board. But I said to him that I did. And then when I went to the board, I said that he wants to resign, which was not entirely true. But, there's loads of stories like that in business where people tell little white lies to achieve what they want to achieve. Brewdog, for instance, they started up their company. They couldn't raise any cash. And they went to a bank and said that we've just been offered a big loan by the people across the road. If you're prepared to beat it, we'll go with you. And, this goes on all the time. And I think if you play everything by the book, you'll get nowhere. So I achieved what I wanted to achieve and was take control and change the business dramatically overnight, really put a huge amount of energy into it, changed all the products, changed all the marketing. And it was hugely successful, which allowed us to acquire all our competitors, basically, in the UK.
Yeah, what's really interesting is you reinvented yourself after your demise, so to speak, but you also reinvented the jewellery business itself. Essentially, you kind of made gold jewellery like costume jewellery, yeah? It was kind of like the same price. It was more accessible to the lower income, people on a lower income and the working class. So it was kind of jewelry that they would go out and buy to go out on a Saturday, Friday night, and rather than jewelry for life. And that hadn't been seen before within the jewelry business.
No, jewelry was a once in a lifetime purchase. It was a province of the rich, like air travel used to be, or going out to eat. People, working class people, places like Liverpool, Newcastle couldn't afford to buy jewellery at all. But gold actually is very pliable. And if you're a little piece of gold, you can roll out from here to Edinburgh. So we used gold in a totally different way, which is basically used less of it. So the earrings that we sold and the chains and stuff were much lighter and much cheaper. And we promoted them in a big way over the more expensive products like diamond rings, put them in the front of the window, offered them at very low prices. And then again, it's important that your surroundings, if you're selling at low price, your surroundings are not too posh. So we pulled up the expensive carpet and pulled down the chandeliers, threw out the velvet pads, played pop music, and people are much more comfortable, especially young people, coming into a jeweller's than they ever were, because I always felt there was what I call a threshold barrier in them walking into the shops, terrified that they were going to be forced to spend a lot of money. So this completely changed all that. It was scorned upon by the other jewellers who thought we were degrading everything. But as I said, it was hugely successful. In fact, we were taking more money in our shops than any other retailer in Europe per square foot, which was quite an incredible achievement.
And you still did have high-end jewellery in there, within Ratner's. You still, I remember a year ago when I was chatting to my dad, and he's got a new girlfriend. They've been together a couple of years now. And I was talking about you. It was a year ago, saying that I'd love to have you on the podcast. And of course, I remember her husband unfortunately passed away of Alzheimer's a few years ago now. But I remember her saying to me, she said, oh yeah, when all that happened, she said, I remember Tom bought my, I think it was either the wedding ring or the engagement ring from Ratner's. And she said he never bought me rubbish. She said he always bought good quality stuff. And then obviously when that joke happened and, Ratner's, the kind of name kind of became associated with jewelry that wasn't that high end, I guess for people that had spent that money, that had kind of invested, that their earnings, maybe they did just feel like their noses were out of joint a little bit.
Oh, definitely. But, it's a misconception that I ever said jewelry was crap. Yeah. I referred to one particular item, a sherry decanter, which we acquired when we bought H. Samuel, which was a cut glass sherry decanter with 6 glasses on a silver tray.
I got what resin.
I was going to make a comment about that. I refrained myself. I'm sure that's very good quality crystal. But funny, you just picked that up as I said that.
I know, that was hilarious. Well, look, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I got a cup of tea because I've just been rushing around all morning. So I got a cup of tea, and then I put a bottle of water, and I thought, look, it's just not very pleasant or very polite if I take a swig out of my bottle of water. So I went in the kitchen, and there was some IKEA glasses, and there was these, and I thought, oh, cut glass.
Well, that, something, I bet they're quite low price as well. And but yeah, I mean, I shouldn't have made a joke about that, but I never ever. In fact, in that same speech, you'll be absolutely shocked to hear that I said that we've achieved what we achieved by selling high quality products sold by high quality staff. I mean, that's on the internet, my whole speech. But we do this sherry decanter. I was totally misquoted. But as I said, I'm not blaming anybody. That's I shouldn't have used that word crap at all. But we wouldn't have got to 50% of the jewellery market by selling crap. Nobody's ever done that. It's totally impossible, especially young people who've got very good eyesight. And unless the claw's holding that diamond, and that diamond beautifully sparkling, they won't buy it. They'll buy it all on looks, and you won't sell anything unless it's the highest quality. In fact, when I took over from my father, first thing I did was close the factory that we had that was manufacturing diamond rings for the shops. And that factory, in my view, was not producing quality jewellery in any way. And they were very lazy because they had a customer that would just buy everything that they said because they made because we owned it. So I closed that down and told the buyers they could buy from whoever they liked. So it was absolutely imperative that we had the highest quality. And that is the irony of the stigma that we then had after the speech. But again, probably my fault.
You say it was
Bear.
the dog?
God, you're well researched this. Bear is 12 and a half, and he's got some fat lumps. So he's gone to the vet, and the vet tested them. And at the moment, I'm very, very worried that, it might be something serious. I'm praying that it isn't. And I know it's only a dog.
It's not only a dog. Yeah, I know you love your animals, and that was going to be.
I know you had your incident with a cat.
Yeah, look, I love all animals. I'm more of a dog person, but yeah, I did.
Yes.
I rescued a cat recently, and I'd been feeding this cat for 5 weeks in the park near the running track. Yeah. And obviously, I developed a relationship with it. I mean, it was the most adorable, beautiful cat ever. And one day I just thought, right, I'm going to take her because all the other cats around there had disappeared. Municipality takes them in Dubai, and apparently they euthanize them, so they kill them. But this one was that friendly. I think she'd escaped the wrath of municipality. And I took her and I rescued her. And but what I didn't post on my Facebook about that was literally 2 days later, the family who I placed her with lost her, like a brand new baby kitten, completely just taken off the street, out of her surroundings, scared, frightened. They put her in the garden and she jumped the wall. That was when we were supposed to have our last, because we'd scheduled in this interview for Christmas. I was literally just in no state of mind because I was literally just camped out next to a bush. We located her. She was quite far away from the home, but she was living in the middle of a bush. It was kind of like a dual carriageway, and it was just a matter of time before she got knocked over. So I was there for like 7 or 8 hours trying to catch her.
Fantastic.
And finally got her in a trap. We had to, she would come to me. It just goes to show how scared and what fear can do to these poor little animals.
Well, this is what, upsets me. And I don't think I would have another dog after this because it's just too upsetting when they're ill and they get old and they suffer. And the last dog I had, which was a chocolate Labrador, I cried when he died, which I didn't actually do that when my parents died. So there's obviously something wrong with me. But I get very, very close. to the dog because, since I lost my job, I have time to spend a lot of time walking the dog and being with the dog. And
what positive influences do animals have in your life? What is it about having a dog that you love?
Well, he loves me, with all the stuff that I get on Twitter every day, all the abuse and stuff like that. It's nice to have somebody who actually adores you. I'm working out this morning in the drawing room with my TRX, these bands that you pull. And he just comes in, pushes the door open with his head, comes in, gives me a lick on my nose, and then walks out again. Oh. And he just came in to give me a kiss, so their love is totally unconditional. And they're always, when somebody comes to the door, they wag and they like everybody. And when I had my health clubs, I always said, try and be like a Labrador, really make somebody, when you greet somebody, give them a big smile and make them feel welcome, like my dog does. They thought I was mad, but actually one of the most important things in the health club was smiling, because people, like you're smiling at the moment, people look a million times better when they smile. I've got a big problem. I don't smile enough.
100%.
I'm miserable sort.
Yeah, definitely. Smiling, it just changes the energy completely. Sometimes when I'm watching my videos back and I'm looking and I'm a little bit nervous and I'm not smiling, it's not the same.
Everyone looks good when they smile, except you sometimes get these politicians these sort of elderly men who put on these ridiculously false smiles, and that doesn't come off particularly. And it's really quite unpleasant.
Gerald, you mentioned earlier about family when we were first talking. You were talking about your friends when you were younger, and then your family, and almost like you maybe had some regrets in your early days that you didn't give the time and the attention to your family. But one impression that I did get is that you were a very good father, despite you being in a prominent position. So, obviously everyone wanted a piece of you. You were still enjoyed being a father, and you were a very good father, to the best of your ability at the time. How important is family to you?
Well, yeah, I just love, getting up on a Saturday morning with the children and taking them out, whether it's the swings or something like that. I don't know what I'd do with myself, without having the house full of children. That's what I was like that with my parents. It was always a family thing, or just the buzz in the house. And it's a very lonely house when you're just there on your own, or even with your wife, as much you love her. There's something about children and the dog that makes for company and gives you sort of, when you wake up in the morning, gives you something to do that you really enjoy. And that's what I've been doing all my life. And I'm very lucky that my son, who's going to be 30 this year, is still at home. So I rely on him to entertain me, and we go out on cycle rides, and we get our Indian takeaway together and go for walks and play with the dog and stuff like that. So I'm very lucky. I've had that all my life, which I just love. And, I just love children. Well, my own children. My wife says you only like your own children, which is not exactly true, because I've got grandchildren.
I think parents are always biased. Go back to when you were 19 and you were on holiday in Monte Carlo. You heard some really devastating news about your sister. And unfortunately, she'd taken an overdose and she passed away. What impact did losing your sister have on your family at the time? And did the circumstances maybe around that, did that affect any of your future decisions in the future in terms of raising your children, possibly?
Yeah, it did, definitely. Yeah, you're right. I was with my first wife in Monte Carlo. In fact, we hadn't even got married yet. And she received the phone call that my sister had, who was 21, had taken an overdose and died. So we flew back straight away, obviously. And this was really because her name is Juliet, was engaged to somebody who was non-Jewish. And my parents objected to the wedding and insisted that he converted, which he tried to do, but it just went on. And the rabbi in those days, Orthodox rabbi, was not as receptive to this as they are today. And at the latest setback, he decided that he can't go on with this any longer. So he ended the relationship. I don't blame him for that at all. I blame my parents for forcing him to change his religion. So my sister was just devastated, and whether she meant to kill herself or not, but she took vodka and pills and stuff like that. So what that taught me was not to try and force your children to be what you want them to be. Let them get on with it. Don't insist, that they do this or do that. Let them go their own way. Don't try and dominate them, and don't try and force them. And I've had 4 children, and I just let them, I say how much I love them and help them when they need it, but I tend to let them get on with things. And in fact, I was speaking to somebody the other day who's got 4 daughters. And I said, how come you've managed to get 4 daughters that are all so successful? One's a barrister, one's a doctor, one's a nurse, one's an accountant. They're all high achievers. What's your secret? And he says, well, I've just ignored them all my life. So maybe that's going to the other extreme. But there is this danger that my parents tried to craft Juliet in the way, that didn't. You could take a horse to the water, you can't make it drink, And they made a big mistake. So I've learned from that. Apart from that, they were wonderful parents. Yeah. They were wonderful parents for me. They made a big mistake there, which I can understand in those days, because the Jewish fraternity was like a little ghetto in Hendon where everyone was Jewish, and it was a bit of a stigma to marry outside, as they said. Fortunately, now it's very different.
Let's move on to something a little bit lighter. And thank you for answering that, because I know it's probably quite uncomfortable thinking about it. So let's talk about your book. What motivated you to write this book? When did you get the idea, and how was the process? And tell us about your collaboration with Rob.
Rob more kindly asked me to do some mentoring in Dubai, and then afterwards it was in the Cayman Islands. And it kept coming up basically that a job's not for life anymore, that there's benefits in switching horses midstream, that if you're in a job that is not working, in the old days you just put up with it, just like where I was talking about putting up with my family business where it was going nowhere. Nowadays, people are not prepared to put up with the status quo. If things are not working, then even if it's a marriage or a friendship or a business, then there's no point life's too short to just carry on with it. You need major surgery. You need to cut the ties. And that's quite a brave thing to do. I mean, my children moved jobs, which I was worried about because I felt they had a perfectly good, secure job. One at the Economist, one as a school teacher. Why risk that by changing to another job? I was worried that they were going to not have a job at all, but they both changed to huge, huge benefit. And the statistics are that you do benefit from changing job more than not benefit. And especially with the pandemic and the onset of the pandemic, where a lot of us, our businesses, we've got to have a rethink. Our businesses will never be the same again. They've been wiped out. I felt the time was right, as Rob did, to write a book about reinvention and to talk about how we can avoid the obstacles that are associated with that. For instance, with money. When I started my health club business, I didn't have any money. I'd been wiped out by the speech. And I took a site in Henley, which I didn't have the money to buy. It was £750,000. I didn't even have £750. I was in debt. But I told the estate agent, that I was going to buy it. I put it into solicitor's hands. And I then put an advert in the paper, the local paper, and started selling membership for a non-existent club. I hadn't bought it. Yes, it was in solicitor's hands, but I had no way of finalising the deal, completing the deal. So I sold membership, and I put a drawing of how it was going to look, slightly exaggerated about how wonderful it was going to be. And I offered a free joining fee, which was very generous of me, considering I hadn't bought the place. But I got 850 people to sign up. And in the end, it was actually the bank manager's wife who'd also signed up, which I think helped me borrow the money. But I would never have borrowed the money. I would have never been able to raise the money if I didn't have 850 direct debits that people had signed up for a club, which I didn't own, a building that I had nothing to do with. So I started, and I sold it for £4 million 2 years later. So I started that business with nothing. I blagged my way into selling memberships. It was one of the greatest moments of my life, because I'd been absolutely skint for 7 years to suddenly come into this money. But I managed to do it without any capital. So I talk about that a lot. That if that's people's barrier, the main barrier, people say, well, I can't leave my job and start up a business because I don't have any money. You don't need any money. Go and sell something. There's an old saying that don't skin the bear till you've sold the... Sorry, it's a very unfortunate analogy with my dogs we call bear. But don't skin the bear till you've sold the skin, or something like that. Or is it the other way around?
I know what you mean. I've heard this before. It's like me with my Tony Robbins quote, which I remember now.
So what I would do, don't shoot the bear till you sold its skin, or something like that.
Yeah,
but I would definitely sell the skin. And then if I did sell the skin, I'd then go out and shoot the bear. If I had a customer for the skin, I wouldn't just go out and shoot the bear at home. So I wouldn't start a business and spend a lot of money on offices, hire staff, do a lot of advertising, set myself up with this huge expense, hoping that I'm going to bring in business. I would try and bring in business, and then if I brought in business, then start investing in money in offices and stuff. I do it the other way around.
Yeah, that was genius what you did at that time. Everything that had happened, being in a place of depression and hitting rock bottom, to be able to not inherit a business from your father. I know you changed the face, and you really increased the profits, with the jewellery, with Ratner's and the jewellery empire. Father initially set that business up. After this, you started this with literally nothing, which proves that you had the skill set and the business acumen and the motivation and the determination and the commitment to succeed in business.
It's a wonderful thing to build something from scratch, to create something that didn't exist before. If you look at all the FTSE companies today, they're just people that have come in, hired to run that business. And they'll leave in 7 years and somebody else will come and run it. That isn't the same as starting your own business and building it up. There's no comparison with that. That's why I admire the people that did that, rather than people that just come in as chief executives and then move on to the next challenge.
When you lost everything and you were at rock bottom and you were going through, this period of time where you were just sat at home alone, was there a moment, a defining moment that you can remember when you just said, right, this has got to end. I've really just got to sort myself out, pull my socks up and make something happen?
I was, as you say, I was at home for 7 years, watching Countdown in the afternoon.
Carol Vorderman.
Yeah, it was a much better program when she was doing it. And in fact, my great thing was when I met her, when I did Celebrity Apprentice, she was on that. So it was a great thing to meet her. But it wasn't a good thing to do, to sit at home watching Countdown. But my wife threatened to throw me out unless I got a job, because we built up debts and stuff. and I was really had given up. So when she threatened to do that is when I went out and started up the gym. I thought I had no choice. Sometimes you do need somebody in those situations to give you a kick up the arse. So I was thankful to her for doing that. I probably would have still been in bed today watching Countdown if it wasn't for her.
If you were to start out in business, like all over again now, what do you think you would do? Would you go into the jewellery business, or knowing what you know now, what would you do?
Well, I was in the jewellery business in the 80s at the best possible time. We had Margaret Thatcher running things, who was the best prime minister we've ever had. She makes everybody that's come after her look sort of pretty second rate. And I was fortunate enough to meet her a few times. She was my hero. But she made business, she made, the whole, she gave business an opportunity. She realised the importance of business because, if people are out buying things in the shops, then they give jobs to people, and those people are earning money, they spend money. It's a correlation. The most important thing are actually in an economy is the shops, people buying things. That fuels the economy. And we're not getting that now. But I was in the right business at the right time. I then went into the health club business when there was no competition. That was at the right time. I then went online in 2001 when it was unfashionable, built a business, 25 million turnover. So I was in the businesses at the right time. I got out at the right time. Not that I chose to get out of my first business, but so I would go into something that was unfashionable, not a business that everybody feels is a panacea and just follow people like sheep. I always feel that you should be doing something where there isn't the competition. I mean, when we started online, it cost us pay-per-clicks to sell an eternity ring, £3 to pay-per-clicks to sell a £200 eternity ring. Pay-per-clicks now is about £150 to sell that same eternity ring because there's so many people that are trying to sell that eternity ring. So to me, that's the time to move on. So I would go into a business that is unfashionable, and it might not even be anything to do with the internet. As long as you do it well, and you don't think there's a quick buck to be made, and you're a good salesman, because that's part and parcel of everything that we do is selling. I've got a friend who had a Christmas cracker business. He sold crackers to Tesco, Sainsbury's. He sold his business for £7 million. The people who took over were not salesmen. So the buyers at Tesco and Sainsbury's never bought any more crackers. It wasn't the crackers that were so good. It was his selling. There's another guy who sold his business selling hangers to Marks and Spencer's for £85 million. He sold his business to the management. I mean, there's nothing sexy about hangers. But again, he was a salesman and he knew how to sell his product.
I've always been very proficient at marketing. As a friend of mine, he knows somebody who buys knives from China, repackage them, so it's a private label brand, and makes it look like they're made in Germany. He's built a hugely successful business of this, and a massive success. People think they're getting German knives, basically. I mean, they're very good quality, but he's just put a German name on them and just repackaged them and marketed them really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, I built my business, the world's largest jewellers, with profits of £125 million, which was in 1991 is the equivalent of £1 billion profit. There's not a lot of retailers that are making £1 billion profit today. I don't know of any. But that was done on marketing, of selling. And I always instilled that into the managers. Sell, sell, sell. And we put them on massive incentive schemes, which was unheard of in those days. We even had our van drivers on incentive schemes to save, to get, to drive at a certain speed. So they use less petrol and stuff like that. Everybody was incentivized.
Wow.
That was the key. We've got to sell.
There's a comment you made on a Facebook post, which I thought was quite interesting, that Philip Green admitted that 50% of the profits from Topshop, they were from costume jewellery.
Yeah, well, I known Philip for years. not a fan, I'd be the first one to say, because I believe that, a retail business needs love and care, and it needs investment the whole time. He's an asset stripper. BHS and Topshop were ruined because they didn't have the oxygen of money. All the money went to him. So that is a terrible indictment. But nevertheless, I've always known him. And it was funny enough, the day of my daughter's wedding at the Dorchester Hotel, and he was living there. And I arrived there and got out the car, and he was standing there having a cigarette outside. And he said to me that 50% of my profit from Topshop comes from costume jewellery. I said, that's ridiculous. How's that possible? He says, well, because the profit margin on costume jewellery is ginormous. It's like 10,000%. So even though it's perhaps only, it's still, we sell a lot of it, but we sell about 15% or 20% of our total turnover is costume jewellery. Because if you looked at the Topshop in those days, they all had a big stand on the counter of costume jewellery hanging down, and people used to buy it on impulse. But the margin was so high that even though the sales were only 15%, it contributed to 50% of the total profit. It was just phenomenal. And actually, somebody else who was in costume jewellery used to supply the airlines. I looked at them again, and they were making an absolute fortune. Sometimes you look at, people don't realise, you look at particular people and you see their lifestyle and you think, what are they doing? And you think, well, they're just another selling costume jewellery or that. But it's clearly that costume jewellery at that time, I don't know about now, was a business where you made huge margin. Huge margin is the most important thing in retail, whereas I tried to buy Dixon's once and I walked away from it because their gross margin was 27%. Very low on electricals because it's so cut price. Jewellery was 55%. But costume jewellery is 400% because nobody knew the value of costume jewellery. Costume jewellery costs nothing to produce and you can sell it for £10, £20. So while it lasted, it was a phenomenal business. And yes, half of Topshop, which has never been reported, half of Topshop's profit came from costume jewellery, not clothes. All you ever talk about is their clothes and, the fashion and thing. Nobody ever mentions the costume jewellery. So that's why in business, you always have to look further than the headline.
It was really interesting because I would always just associate Topshop with clothing. You knew that they would always sell the jewellery, but I always thought it was tended to be a little bit overpriced, for costume jewellery in places like Topshop.
The reason was it was overpriced because a lot of it was nicked. To sell costume jewellery, you can't put it behind glass like you can with real jewellery.
Yeah, so people would steal it.
That was tremendous risk to just leave jewellery hanging out there on hooks for everybody to try on so they could steal it. And they did. But that didn't matter because the profit margin was so high that they could accept 10% shrinkage, which is massive. I mean, we had 2% shrinkage. They had 10% shrinkage. But they didn't care. They took the right view. Yes, we're going to get a lot of it stolen. But unless we do that, we're not going to sell it. So you've got to be objective. I know somebody once had somebody who ran a fish and chip shop and he said, he's on the fiddle completely. But he's brilliant at running the fish and chip shop. I'm taking about 3 times more than I would with anybody else. So I just let him steal. I just take that view. But as long as we're not partners anymore, if he steals more than I'm getting, then I'll sack him. But
we're always in business. Back in his day, my granddad was very successful, and then I remember he lost everything at one point. He was in fireplace business, but it was generally catering that they were in, and they had a very successful transport cafe in Sedgefield. So you remember Sedgefield, Tony Blair's constituency?
Absolutely, yes.
And it's a nice hotel on the green. And Nana and Grandad had that as a transport cafe. And my grandfather was well known for his Charlie special.
Yeah.
Everyone used to go to the cafe for his Charlie special. And I remember him admitting to me one day, he said there was nothing special about it. He said, I just used, so basically Charlie's special was a full English breakfast. Yeah. And he said, I just used to put it on a bigger plate. And I'd bulk it out with, he's a Yorkshire man, and I'd bulk it out with beans. And maybe put an extra rasher of bacon on there. So people thought they were actually getting a lot more than they were. But the reason I mentioned my grandfather, because I remember they had a pinball machine in the cafe. And I remember him saying to me that was a little gold mine, the money they used to take from that machine.
I know a lot of these restaurants, fish and chip places like that. And I knew this guy who used to sell flowers in Covent Garden. He had more money than he used to bring out these wads of notes, £50 notes, stuff like that. Yeah. But it's interesting what you're saying about that he's bulking out the plate with baked beans, because, we used to sell diamond rings with illusion settings that made the diamond a lot bigger than it was, because it had a bit of white gold cut up round the setting. And Alan Sugar always used to say a mug's eye full with his computers, He wasn't calling them mugs, but, that was a reference to a customer, that it looked a lot more than it was. We bulk it out, which is the key to it. So that applies to baked beans as it does to computers, to diamond rings. Make it added value.
Yeah, definitely. It's something called illusion, isn't it? Didn't Toblerone do
That's right,
something similar?
Ring. Sorry?
Toblerone, they did something similar. I think the bars got smaller or something.
Yeah. Well, they're doing it all the time. Making it look bigger when it's fact it's smaller.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the key to it. But we had a ring called an illusion ring, which would be about a 10-point diamond, which is 1/10 of a carat. But it looked like a half a carat because it was set with a white gold disc around it. So at first glance, because you don't look, when you see somebody, you don't put your nose right up to their hand on a ring. You look at it from a distance. So you would never know that. And we used to display our rings at 42 inches from the ground because the average woman was 5'4" and the trajectory of her eye would fall at that point. So we're making a very small item look very big, much more important than it really was. Marketing, that's good marketing.
It's fair to say that we're experiencing the death. We've experienced the death of the high street. Where do you see malls going in the future? Think they're going to go almost the same way as the high street, and that malls are going to turn into, I don't know, maybe entertainment places or something? Because more and more people are just shopping online these days.
Well, I wrote an article in the Mail on Sunday, page article in the spring of last year, where I said the high streets are dead, turn them into houses instead. And I said that's a bit harsh, but in fact then the government said the same thing about 6 months later. Because like I was saying before, if something is dead, something's not working, if you're in a job that, my book, Reinvention, if you're in a job that's not working, move jobs. If you're in a marriage that's not working, end the marriage. I'm a firm believer that you have to face up to I didn't, for 7 years when I was watching Countdown, but I've learned, you do learn from your mistakes, that if something is not working, it's not going to just change by itself. If you're not earning any money, you're not going to discover oil at the end of your garden, an oil well, as much as you will win the lottery, as much as you might hope. So the fact is, the evidence is clear. The high street is dead. It's finished. And there's a lot of people who wouldn't buy online, who've had to buy online, and they quite like it. And reason being, because it's cheaper and better, and it's just more convenient. I mean, I know there are exceptions, trying on stuff and stuff like that, but by and large, you can shop around a lot easier for price. You get a money-back guarantee service. It arrives very quickly. You can compare with other products. It's very difficult. If you see something in one shop, you have to go to another shop. Then you've forgotten what price it was. You can just do it so easily online. And also, it's not great walking around the high streets in the pouring rain. Parking is not helpful. There's a lot of shops now in the high street that shouldn't have been there. And I don't want to sound uncharitable, but the government allowing charity shops to go in there without paying rates was ridiculous, because they had a proliferation of charity shops in high streets, which don't attract people. People don't get out and they say, oh, let's go to the Saturday afternoon, let's go down to the high street so we can go to see what the charity shops have got. I mean, and then you've got the banks that have all closed. There's not a bank that I ever see. They're all going to close. HSBC have announced today they're closing 86 banks. There's no reason to go to a bank anymore. So everything's closing. Betting shops. I mean, what is the attraction of the high street? Nil compared to the internet. So the high street will go, and it's going very fast. They are the very small type of high streets where you've got the nice butchers still doing and the little tea shops. But by and large, the city centre high streets are finished. And I think the malls as well will be the next to go. When I started, all we had was the high streets in the 1960s. There was no internet, there was no malls, there was no out-of-town shopping. Now, of those four, the weakest is the high street. The second weakest is the malls. There's just not enough money to sustain that amount of shopping with the way that the internet's going. And the internet's only going to go one way. And I've been saying this for 10, 15 years in my speeches, that the internet is only going to get bigger. It's not going to get smaller. There's a lot of drawbacks with the internet. It's ridiculous, people just looking at their phones all day long. That's the way it's going. No, so I was on holiday in Dubai, and wonderful weather, lovely hotel, beautiful swimming pool and beach. And I'm walking from the beach to the hotel lobby. And as I pass, every single person is on the phone. I mean, the last thing you want to do is be on the phone when you've got this lovely weather and out in the fresh air. But that's it. People are more interested in the phone than doing anything else. I nearly ran somebody over the other day because they were just looking at the phone as they were crossing the road.
Yeah, I was in my car yesterday and a policeman passed me and he was on the phone.
Yeah. There's I don't know what if you go on a train, I guarantee you stand up by the door, you look down the carriageway, 95% of everybody is staring at their phone. So you don't need to be a genius to realise that if you want to sell something, sell it to somebody who's looking at a phone.
Yeah.
That's where your audience is. I always learned years ago, my uncle, who was the property estates manager in the company, estates director, he wouldn't like me calling him manager, estates director, he always said to me, whatever you do, take a shop. We always take a shop where there's crowds going past. Never take a shop where it's empty. Now, the phone is the equivalent of Oxford Street, crowds going past. I walked down Oxford Street recently. I know we're in the middle of a pandemic, but it's empty. There's no one. And even when the pandemic ends, it's never going to be as busy as it was because people are looking at their phones. They're buying on their phones. They don't need to go to Oxford Street. That's the way it is. I'm not saying it's good. I don't care whether it's good or bad, but as a retailer, that's where it's at.
And I think we've been going that way a long time now. But with Corona and what's happened with COVID, it seems to have elevated it a lot quicker.
Exactly.
Because people have
We've moved 7 years in a year.
100%. I remember I think it was you were giving an example of just when you were being interviewed by Rob about your wife would never shop online. I mean, that used to be me. I physically used to love going into the store, and I still do. I still like to go in Zara and try the clothes on in there. Do order a lot more online now just because of the convenience. And
she never understood. Yeah.
And until you do it, until you try it, you don't actually realise how much easier it is.
Well, she never liked buying online. She liked the shops, but she's bought online this year and she won't go back to, she'll carry on with it now. We're creatures of habit. Mm-hmm. So the pandemic has accelerated it. There's no question about that.
Do you still have your online jewellery business?
Well, I just feel that selling online, for the reasons I gave before, the cost of it, the reason that attracted me was that I could get my product to the customer at with lower overheads, because having a jewelry shop, you have to have lighting, you have to have rent, you have to have staff. It's one of the few things where people can't help themselves, like in supermarkets and stuff, clothing shops. So we started switching to supplying other retailers, because I'm partners with an Indian factory. And originally they went into partnership with me because they wanted to sell their product in the UK, which we did successfully through Gerald Online, through the online business. But we've been switching now more and more into supplying other people. So our online business comes and goes. It comes at Christmas and goes offline. So the only time you make a profit in the jewelry business is Christmas. So that's the only time we're online. But the rest of the year, we're supplying shopping channels, Amazon, other retailers and stuff like that, which we find is more lucrative, that the margins online have disintegrated. So I'm a margin man. We used to make very high margins when we started. We can't do that anymore. So that doesn't attract me. Turnover is vanity, profit is sanity.
I love that. And on that note, Gerald, thank you very much for being a fantastic guest and for your time today.
It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to speak to you. I mean, this chat has been over a year in the making. I remember I approached you over a year ago, and you politely told me that you didn't like doing interviews.
Oh, right. Oh, sorry about that.
It's okay.
Well, I've got no choice.
I knew I would get to speak to you eventually. I had a quiet self-confidence. So I'm really happy.
Yeah, one of my rules is never to give up. And that is what you didn't give up.